Welcome back to part 4 of the TeleKing 10-inch TV restore. Now that we have the lacquer finish off of the cabinet by using the acetone, we're going to just put a light coat of stain, and we'll be using a Cabernet color. That's what we're looking for, just a light coat. Okay, we have all the stain on, and my plan is to urethane this whole TV once I get the black trim painted, the lower edge molding painted, and we'll paint inside this speaker cutout. But to make sure that the paint won't interact with the polyurethane, this is an acrylic paint, and I don't think it will. I think the urethane will spray right over the top without any problem. But I'm going to put a little bit on this paint stick, and then we'll let it dry, and then we'll put some urethane over the top and just make sure that it doesn't react with it. And that polyurethane will work fine. There's where I've sprayed it over the top of the acrylic black. Been on there about an hour and nothing's happening, so I think we're okay on that. I'm going to wait about probably 48 hours. We'll make sure all the stain is dried, the paint's good and dry. Don't want to get in too big of a hurry. While we're waiting for the cabinet to completely dry with the stain and the paint, let's address these trim pieces that go around the bezel. They have a maple finish, could be pine, but we're going to use the acetone and strip off the outer finish, and then and then we'll put a fresh coat of stain and some poly. Now this TeleKing emblem that took off the front, I've already cleaned it off, and yeah, the finish is pretty bad shape. We're just going to spray a new finish on this. Well, the acetone done a good job of taking that outer finish off. And just a coat of stain on the trim pieces. And there's the color. I had this stain for years. It's called an Early American. I would call it a maple finish. Well, we moved out here in the garage to put the polyurethane on. And I'm going to do this like I did the Dumont TV restore. If you haven't watched those videos, you might want to check them out. It really turned out nice. And the way I put the polyurethane on with the Dumont was I put one coat of brush on. Just used a typical paintbrush and some polyurethane brush on. And then once it dried, I wet sanded it. If I'm not mistaken, I think I used 800 grit paper, or anywhere from 600 to 1,000 grit works really good. But sanded it wet sanded it, and then I went back and put a spray on poly on top of that. So that's what we're going to do with this cabinet. And here's what I'm using. Same brand as the spray on, which is there. Oil-based polyurethane. This is a semi-gloss, which really doesn't matter. We're going to be wet sanding it anyway, so the final finish will be the gloss, which is a spray can. And we'll do the trim pieces with the spray, just the spray gloss on them. Along with the TeleKing emblem, we'll put a coat of clear on that with the spray. Okay, time to do some wet sanding on the cabinet. We moved outside. Nice day out today. Temperature's going to be probably around 70. So good time to work outside. And there's several ways to refinish a cabinet like this. This is just the way I do it. I found that it works good and gives a really good shine when you're finished. Of course, you've seen me brush on the polyurethane, and it's pretty thick. You can actually feel the brush strokes in it, and that's what I wanted. I could see them there. Not sure, but we're going to go back and we're going to wet sand this now. And I'll just use 600 grit paper with water. Get it as smooth as we can. Then we're going to go back with just some spray on polyurethane to finish it up. Just using some 600 grit paper, water, so we'll just continue on, and I'm sanding in a diagonal pattern. Again, just letting the sandpaper do the work. Not really putting a lot of pressure at all on it. And then I'll reverse directions and go this way. And that's feeling pretty smooth. Just plenty of water. Make sure you keep the paper saturated with water. Alright, move the cabinet in the shop, and we're going to put on the spray can polyurethane. Alright, back in the basement. And we're going to put the decals on the front. And once we get all of those put on, we'll put a coat of polyurethane over the front. I'm going to try these first. I have two separate sets of water slide decals that I've made. These have more of the gold showing with a smaller border, and those have a larger border. I don't know which one will show up the best, so we're gonna try these first. I do have some reference photos that I took to show where the decals go. So I think we'll put on the horizontal, vertical, and the brightness contrast decals first, here and here. Add just a bowl of water. I'm going to cut out the horizontal vertical first. You want to cut these as straight as possible, because if the top edge shows a little, you want it to be straight. You don't want it to be a crooked cut. That'll go right here. And looking at the reference photos, they're about 1/4 of an inch from this black trim piece up. So that's where we'll put them. And of course, just want to center them in the opening. So we'll put them in the water. That'll release them. That gold's not showing through as much as I would like. So we're going to do the contrast and brightness. And I'm going to use the ones with the wider border. We'll see what they look like. And those do show up better. So we're going to go with the ones with the wider border. See the difference there. Both are okay, but I like those better. Well, what do you think? The channel numbers, I hesitated on putting those on because I thought, well, it might be better to put the chassis in and make sure that the channel selector lines up to the correct number. But in looking at it, there was still a faint image of where those numbers were. So I put them back in the same place. Hopefully they'll be lined up correctly. It took about 30 minutes to put all of these on. A neat solution that I made pretty easily on the inkjet printer. The only thing I couldn't reproduce was the end of the arrow here. You can still see the image of it, that curve. Couldn't do that, but the rest of it looks almost original. Next, we're going to put the grill cloth on the inside of the cabinet. Thought about using new cloth because if you look at this, you can see the fade, and this was pointing out, so the sunshine's faded that out. But if you flip it over, it still looks good. So I'm going to put this side facing out, and we'll just reuse this. And we'll just use spray adhesive. You spray some on the cabinet, and then you spray some on the cloth. Wait about 5 minutes, and it will stick. Hold it in there. All right. So let's look at the outside and see what it looks like. Now we'll put the 4 speaker screws back in the holes. Of course, we have urethane build up. Just take a punch, clean the holes out. All right, now we'll mount the speaker. Next, we'll put the TeleKing emblem back on. And when I put the final coat of urethane, I'm probably just going to do this lower section right here. I'll tape this up because it doesn't really need any more. But we'll put one more coat over those decals and over the emblem. And again, we need to clean out the hose because there's polyurethane buildup in there. Alright, and here's our clips that go on the back side. If you remember, I squeezed each end to arch them up in the middle where they would come off. And now I've just flattened them back out so they'll fit tight. Alright, clips are put on. And there's our emblem. And just a little painter's tape. Kind of keep the clear. We'll lay something up here. That'll keep the clear off the top. Next we'll put on the glass implosion shield along with the trim strips. Okay, I think we have the cabinet ready for the chassis. Been working several minutes on this surround, making it fit a little better. Unfortunately, the original fit wasn't that great in the corners, so I've been tightening that up, and I got it looking good enough. And while I was working on the cabinet, I hooked the chassis back up, just letting it play. We'll leave it on for a couple more hours just to make sure that everything is still stable. And then we'll get this thing put back together. Next we'll put this bottom on. It had staples that was on it originally, but I might just put a couple of screws in it. Then we'll put our feet on each corner, our new feet. And I think we're about ready for the chassis after that. Alright, bottom's on. Here's our new feet we're going to be using. They just nail in. And that whole bag of, I forget how many was in it, 40, I think was like $10 or $12. So, and they're plastic with a nail and felt on the bottom. Okay, feet installed. I had the knobs cleaned up, and I'm going to spray them with a coat of polyurethane. Trying to make a decision on this back. It's got several gouges and splits in it. Here, that's separated there. I have glued it all back. I'm considering making a new one. I have some masonite that be simple enough to cut out the shape. The holes are going to be the problem. If I counted right, there's 11 holes up and down and 32 across, so that's 352 holes that I'd have to bore in a new piece if I made it like this one. And I'm assuming this is designed to let a lot of heat out with all those holes. I don't know, or I may just put a coat of urethane over it. That'll darken it up and make it look better. I'm going to clamp this down, get the sander out. I'm going to do some sanding on it and see if I can smooth out these rough places. If I can, then I'll maybe put some polyurethane on it or some kind of sealer and see if we can make it look a little better. Well, that's actually turning out better than I thought it would. Got a couple places here where that had the two heavy gouges, but not that bad. And this repair right here that was pushed in, that's really looking good. I think that's going to be good enough. I washed it off. You still see some water right there. So we'll let that dry. Put some polyurethane over the top. Call that done. Just going to brush on the polyurethane on the back using an old chip brush and just some satin. This is the last of this polyurethane in this can, so just mixed it with a little mineral spirits. Made it go on a lot smoother. Chassis in the cabinet, bolted down. Putting the knobs on. Behind these inner knobs, putting a felt washer, and I'm just cutting these out of a piece of felt that I have. And here's a final look at the back. One thing I found interesting was these corners, why they had them chopped off there on each side when the cabinet's just straight. But maybe that this back was made for several different models. And we're using a blonder tongue modulator channel 6. Just got a jumper wire hanging off the antenna terminals. And one final look. Hope you've enjoyed the restore on this 1949 TeleKing. Thanks for watching. See you next time. And here's a TeleKing advertisement from back in the day, probably around 1949. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, how about subscribing to our channel? We would really appreciate it. Thanks.